Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today, well, I'm not going to say today, I'm not sure when this will be published. We're recording on the 28th of May, 2019. And today I have a special guest here with me, namely Alan Williams. Alan, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Curtis. It's a pleasure.
You bet. So let's talk for just a few minutes first about who you are and what you're doing presently, and then I want to take a step back in history and talk about how you got there. So, what do you do presently? And yeah, just tell us that. Let's start there.
I'm a boom operator, and I work in television and motion pictures.
Okay, great. And the question that a lot of people ask and are curious about, I think a lot of times, and for good reason, are how did you get there? So, there are very few. I know when I was a kid, I didn't think, hey, I want to be a boom operator when I grow up. Did you go to sound school or to film school? What was your path for getting there?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I did go to film school, but it doesn't really help you or really put you in line to get jobs in film. As a matter of fact, it's more likely that people are going to make fun of you on set. Say, "Oh, you went to film school? You wasted 4 years doing that?" And it's a joke. But no, ever since I was a little bitty kid, I mean, my mom was going off to work, and I would leave school and I'd go home with my grandmother. And she was an amateur photographer, very active, loved photographs. And I was constantly with her, so I was her subject. And she was always showing me things, showing me the old, 8 millimeter films. And I really developed a love for it then. And then as I got older, she got a video camera. And I would make the worst movies you could ever imagine. And usually being a topic that I was interested in, I was very into martial arts. And I did martial arts for about 20 years or so. But as a little bitty kid, I would make the worst ninja movies you'd ever seen. And so as I got older, I really started to fall in love with film and movies and wanted to be involved with it. And coming out of elementary school, I auditioned to get into the performing arts school at DeKalb, what's now DeKalb Center for the Arts, and at the time it was DeKalb Center for the Performing Arts. And so I got into the program and trained in dance, believe it or not, acting, tech theater, a whole bunch of things. And then upon graduating, I went to work as what they called a production assistant, but it's not like a PA like you'd run into on a set. It was the right-hand man of the owner. I basically did editing. I was his lead shooter. I'd go out and do jobs. And this is when I was 18. He hired me because I had a passion and a real aggressive interest in it. I was already doing public access TV at the time, where I met a guy named Aaron Siegel, who's a production sound mixer now. He actually has an engineering degree and has cut albums with, people all the way back to the 80s. As a matter of fact, he even worked with Trent Reznor on some album. I remember he was telling me some stories about Trent Reznor before he really made it big in Nine Inch Nails. Okay. But doing work through the public access station and kind of becoming one of his main assistants, I guess you could say. I kind of directed his public access film review show, became really good friends with him. And when he went into the film industry, I was not ready to go into it full time. And I was still doing things. As a matter of fact, I had a whole bunch of different odd jobs, in addition to being the shooter at the video production company, which, by the way, started me into sound, because my videos, my own personal projects, sounded like garbage.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that a huge part of the way something looks is the way it sounds. And he was really the person that said, if it doesn't sound good, it's not going to look good. And so I started to learn sound for that reason. He also had a DJ company, so I'd go off and DJ some parties too. But at the time, I had long hair. And so he was only willing to put me in certain environments. As a shooter, that was fine. But when Aaron got into film, I could have gone either way, camera or sound. And because he went into sound, there was this movie called The Greenskeeper, which I think we shot in 2000. And we shot it at the studio that is now where Walking Dead shoots, before Walking Dead ended up being there. But the movie was called The Greenskeeper, and we ended up, I didn't do the whole movie, but I did enough of it. And he would occasionally, hire me for other shows or say, can you mix this, or can you be a boom op for this? And it was usually small projects. Mm-hmm. But and in the meantime, I was still doing other jobs. I was, customer service. So I learned people skills there. I even taught martial arts professionally for a time, and I specialized in all kinds of things. And one of the things I did was weapons. And so when I when the films incentives came to Georgia and it looked like I could make a career of going full time at it, I did. And then being that Aaron was the main person that I was still continuing to do jobs for every now and then, and he needed a boom op because his boom operator went into the production department. And he says, I need a boom op. And I said, okay, well, let's do it then. So I jumped back in and we started doing movies and commercials and TV shows together. And one of the things I found is that the people skills and my customer service training helped me with interacting with people on set. And the martial arts background, especially with working with like bow staffs and stuff like that, I was able to modify into using those techniques regarding balance and how to snap a boom pole places. And that kind of helped me there too. So basically, it's really weird because I was also a professional photographer for 5 years in there as well. And so
Wait a minute, wait
I
a
learned,
minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. You look like you can't be a day over 27 or 8. So how in the world have you done all this?
I'm in my 40s. I'm in my 40s.
Okay,
So
you're aging nicely.
thank you. But yeah, I was a photographer, and after about 2 years or so, I was promoted to what's called a lead photographer, and I was over Tennessee and North Georgia. So I went around and I was a trainer, team mentor. I did quality assurance, field evaluations, that kind of thing, and I also still photographed. So I learned lighting. I learned, I understood what camera stuff was. So as soon as I got into film, I could look at a light, know the quality of the light, know how that was going to affect me as a boom operator, know how to swing a pole around, knew how to do muscle shifting automatically, stances, helped me with my balance and that kind of thing. So it kind of ended up being one of those things that kind of worked out for me
Hmm.
that I was a boom op. And being that I'm a very social person and I love being on set and interacting with people, it just became one of those things where I just enjoy being on set. And I've been asked, why don't you become a mixer? Well, I like being on set. It's just what I want to do. So I
Yeah,
have, as of
yeah.
now, the mindset of being a career boom op.
Okay, cool. And it's interesting. A couple of things. First of all, you're not the first boom op I've met or encountered. I actually haven't met the other guy that also was into martial arts as a kid or as a younger person. That's interesting. And he said, and I wish I remember who it was. It was someone that Matt Price had interviewed some time ago, but
Doug Cameron,
it could be.
now he interviewed me.
Oh,
He
okay.
did sound chat number 11 was me. And I had a beard at the time and I had booms and stuff behind me and there was a fire going and that kind of thing.
Maybe that was you. That could
Yeah,
be. In any case, that's really interesting. And actually, I find the boom up position is as you point out, it's a really interesting position in the sound department for a lot of the reasons you listed, obviously. But it's a very physical position, obviously.
it is.
You're doing 8 to 12 hour or maybe even longer days, unfortunately, in some
Yeah,
cases, of very physical work. And it's a lot. It is. I agree with you. It's a lot of fun because you're right up in the action. You're right
it is.
there with the actors and things of that nature. But what are the important skills? I think that when someone who is watching this from the outside, one of the things I think they're curious about, and I think myself included, a lot of people think, oh, boom opping can't be that hard. I mean, basically, you're holding a pole and you're aiming a microphone, but there's some nuance to it, a lot more nuance to it. Is
Oh
that your
man, do you want me to go into it?
go
It's
into it?
it's I
Absolutely.
tell you, it's one of those things where you can dive in deep.
Hmm.
And it's one of those things where I have. Uh, Being a boom op, people always think, oh, you're the guy that holds the pole over the actors. And usually the first question is, do you get to talk to the actors? Do you really interact with people? I mean, does the pole get heavy? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not a machine, of course. I mean, if I'm doing a long take, of course it'll get tiring. But the thing about it is the boom operator, first of all, we're on our feet all day.
Hmm.
So we usually work at least a 12-hour day. And so we'll come in there and from call, we'll watch the rehearsal, we'll figure out, and because that's one of the boom operators, position. One of the things we do is we watch the rehearsal, then we go back and talk to the sound mixer and the sound utility and get a game plan on. We say, well, this person walks from here to here, and then from here to here, and then he bends down, and when he does that, the lav is going to probably scratch if he's using a lav, and I'm going to put a plant down there for that one line, and when he comes back up, we'll get him on a boom again. But there's always a wide shot that you need to cover as well, and I'll get a game plan on with the
Hmm.
team. But when it comes down to it, I have to interact with everybody on set. And so one of the things I'm doing is I'm constantly listening because the job as being a boom operator, you have to listen. So if I'm on set and everyone's working, I still have to listen and identify the sounds. If someone comes out comes to set with a joker, I have to know that that ballast is going to buzz and ask them to run it around a corner off set. Because
Hmm.
if not, they'll put the ballast right there on set, and as soon as it gets quiet, zzz, you'll hear it. So
Right.
I have to know that that light makes a buzz.
Yeah.
And when people will come out and put sky panels up, some sky panels have fans on them. So I have to look at them and say, could you do me a favor and make sure that fan is set to off? And sometimes they'll say, we can't do that. The best we can do is turn it to the low setting. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll do that. But
Hmm.
then also part of it is identifying the lighting and knowing what the lighting is. And if there is an issue with the move I have to do in order to get my boom in the right place over the actors,
Hmm.
I have to work with the lighting team, usually the director of photography, gaffer, and key grip, in order to make sure that that light is maybe if it's just spread across a wall, maybe they can cut a little corner of it right where my boom would go across. So that way they put a flag and kind of, make it so a shadow falls on the wall at that place so you don't see my boom.
Right.
But then also I have to understand the words and where they are, who says what and when. So I have to study the sides. And sides, if anyone's watching this and aren't familiar with that, you're familiar with the script. Well, the
Hmm.
sides are the part of the script that we're doing that day. And we're given that at the beginning of the day. So one of the things I'll do is I'll go through it and say, this actor says this line here, then this person says this, then this person says this, and I have to study it and know what those are and when. So some boom operators will just learn, okay, it's this person, then this person, then this person, then this person. Some people will remember the last word. I usually remember the whole thing because remember, I have an acting background.
Hmm.
So I'll remember all the lines and I'll be snapping the boom all over the place to get whoever I can, especially concentrating on the people that are on camera. But, but then there's also the technical end of the microphone itself. The microphone, depending on where I am in the environment, there's noises in the world. And sometimes you have to cue the microphone away from those noises while still keeping it on access to a mouth. And
Hmm.
if an actor tilts their head down or turns to the side or turns around behind them, I have to know how to spin that microphone around to, like, when somebody bends their head down, I have to be able to get that microphone still in front of them. Otherwise, it starts to sound like the microphone's behind their heads because it is.
Right.
So there's a
Right.
whole lot to what I have to do
Yeah.
on a daily basis, just to be able to get called back for the next day.
Another thing that comes to my mind that I have, and again, I don't do as much. I'm not working at the level of production you are. I'm doing mostly short films or small budget things. But another thing I found really helpful is to understand, especially when they're shooting with two plus cameras at the same time. I need to understand the focal lengths and what that means for me in terms of where I can boom. Is that,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, and not only that, like you mentioned, there's multiple cameras.
Hmm.
Um, there'll be sometimes, yeah, and those cameras don't just stay put; they will move.
Yeah.
And so, and you'll have a big dolly that takes up most of the room, especially when they put down dance floor. And so I'll have to, do the dance with the dolly grip and the camera operator to make sure that my feet don't end up under the dolly
Hmm.
and that I can still go where I need to get my shot done. But then there's other camera angles too. There'll usually be a wide and a tight. So I have to do the balance of staying out of the wide while still pushing the frame as much as I can for the tight. And if it's just too wide and too tight, then it's got to resort to a lav or a plant or something like that. So I would have to call in a plant if that was the case. But I mean, also, as soon as people put down all that dance floor, when dance floor is basically just like a piece of wood, and then they put down masonite on top of it. So that way then they tape it down, tape the seam, so that way it is a flat plane that the dolly can move on to do
Hmm.
the shot smoothly. Or they'll put down track or something like that. And when that goes down over carpet, for example, and people are walking around in a wide shot, you don't hear their footsteps. But as soon as we punch in for that coverage, suddenly the dance floor is all over the ground. Clip, clop, clip, clop. I have to work with the sound utility to make sure that their feet are padded in just a way where you don't hear their footsteps. And
Hmm.
sometimes that also involves putting down carpets, little 3x5 or longer runners or something like that, in order to get those footsteps quiet, because we are supposed to
Yeah.
match the picture. And if
Yep.
it's supposed to sound like a room that's carpeted, then and it's got to match the wide. I got to do what I can to make it acoustically sound that way, and
Yeah.
acoustics also play into it.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's just we have to do a lot of stuff.
There's a lot of problem solving that's going on in real time, it seems like, in my
There is.
experience as well. And so the one thing I'm curious about, so a couple of things, just so we make sure everyone understands, we have some people that are much more experienced, some that are less. When you say plant, what are you referring to?
That's a microphone that we put out in the set someplace to catch a line.
Okay.
So if for example you're not seeing this wall in the shot, but an
Hmm.
actor turns this way and delivers a line and it's a wide shot, but if you don't see that wall, I could hide a microphone right there on the wall so that way I can get their line. Plants are usually effective if you can't get a boom over someone, and depending on the plant you use, it can quite often sound better than a microphone that's underneath the clothes, hidden on an actor whose head will turn off access to it.
Yeah.
So depending on what you put down there, it can actually be something that matches a boom quite well.
Okay. So a plant mic is a great potential solution for the wide shots. What about when you can't, when there's no place to put a plant? What are the other things you kind of approach? What's in your toolkit to address a wide shot when you can't put a plant mic in?
It depends
Okay.
is the best question. And I mean, obviously a lav mic is a viable solution as a backup plan. We usually try to use them as backups, but in a wide shot, quite often we have to resort to them. Or if there's too much background noise, quite often a mixer will resort to it because it picks up less than a boom does.
Hmm.
So a plant microphone, it may be one of those things that you can put on a wall. If you don't have a wall there, then you have to resort to a plant or a microphone on somebody. But if that's not an option, and if it's a locked off shot, you can actually work with the camera team, and depending on the show, and like it doesn't work if it's a film show, for example, but if they're shooting in high enough resolution, they can freeze the frame, take a plate, and then the top part of it, if they do a plate, then they can visually kind of loop a piece of video, and your boom can live in that and basically swing all over the place. And it's a boom removal trick that doesn't cost anything, if at all. I
Right.
mean, it doesn't cost much, if at all. And that's one option too, depending on the show you're on and who the post house is, and producers if they're willing to, directors if they're willing to, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. How I'm curious. So, a couple of things. Number one, how often do you end up doing that? I guess like kind of the plate compositing out thing. How often do you get to use that technique? Or is that fairly rare?
It depends on the show. When I
Okay.
did Stranger Things season 2, at the beginning of the show, they were a little bit more willing to do it constantly, but as the show progressed, the pace picked up a little bit and they were wanting to just shoot multiple cameras more often. So at that point, they were like, we don't have time for that. Let's just go ahead and just do this old fashioned, I guess you
Okay.
could say. And so
Yeah.
that's when we stopped doing the play thing. But even then, still, they let us do it sometimes. Also, it depends on the director. I think I first did it on the show Hindsight because the DP was insisting on doing this really wide shot where it was like 4 feet of headroom, and the girl that was on camera was wearing underwear and kept changing shirts, trying to do like the whole clueless thing of changing shirts to see what fit and what she liked looking in a mirror.
Mhm.
And she kept talking and saying, "Oh, this is nice" and stuff. And I'm like, no place to put a lav. And they
Right.
wanted to shoot wides and tights on that so that way it would match. And I'm like, there's no way to do it. And at the time he was like, no, no, there is a way to do it. What we'll do is take a plate. And he kind of put the bug in my ear about this.
Okay.
And I said, okay, well, that works.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've done it on other shows. You can't do it on a film show. So because just the natural jitteriness of a film, it
Hmm.
just doesn't work. But quite a few shows will let us get away with it if they understand that it's not going to mess up the show and production. As long as I mean, sometimes it's in the director is not understanding, but the DP will explain it, and the director's still not comfortable. Sometimes the director will say, "Oh, then sure. If you say it's fine, then it's fine."
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. Cool. I'm really curious to talk to you about, and I hope you don't feel this is too pedestrian, but can we talk about boom poles a little bit? What
sure.
people, I'm just using a K-Tech, one of the graphite poles. It has a little, 90-degree angle out at the bottom. I'm curious what a full-time boom operator looks for in a boom pole, and what are you using, and what are you looking for?
Well, it all depends on the person. K-Tech makes great products, especially their new classic Pro Pole. That
Hmm.
is, it really took their their classic pro line. I mean, their classic poles were already really nice,
Hmm.
but then it took it up a notch. But depending on, and there's a whole bunch of brands out there. There's Panamic that you can't internally cable at all, but people consider it to be like the Ferrari of the boom pole world. Ambient in Germany, they
Hmm.
Panamic is actually in the UK, and Germany is where Ambient's from. And I'm an Ambient guy. I love their stuff. It's carbon fiber poles. You can internally straight cable most of them, which is the way I like to use them. You can, of course, externally wrap or put a transmitter on the end, like an A10 or something. You can also get a QXS series and internally coiled cable it too. There's VDB. There's Loon, which I don't know the status of Loon since the Don died either last year or the year before. Uh, there's PSC. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different products that are made that professionals really love, and you'll run into different boom operators that will swear by their brand.
Hmm.
There's a lot of pros in town that will swear by K-Tech. Others will swear by Ambient. Some people will swear by Panamic, and it's one of those personal preference things. If you, for example, boom with gloves, then you may prefer to have one type of pole that either grips it or allows the pole to slide in your hand better. If you don't like booming with gloves, but your hands are drier or more oily, you may prefer one kind of pole. Depending on if you would rather have a light pole that maybe isn't quite as rigid, or would you rather have or you don't really care if it's a heavier pole as long as it is pencil straight and stiff and allows you to snap it where you want to. There's a whole bunch of different things about picking out a boom pole that you have to consider. As a matter of fact, you mentioned Matt Price. He has a wonderful reference on his website, which is what he calls a boom pole cheat sheet. And I think he charges £1 for it, but it's something like 120 or 130 different booms that he has gone through, like all the major manufacturers, listed how many segments they are, what the material is, how long the pole is collapsed, how long it is when it's fully extended, what's it made of, the approximate price, and just all these different things. And it's a really good resource if you're trying to figure out what polls you should at least consider.
Okay, makes sense. So I'm curious then. Okay, so that definitely makes sense. So very much down to personal preference, very much down to how you like to work, very much down to your individual characteristics, all those things. So why don't you walk us through why you are such a big ambient fan? I'm curious about that. If you're okay talking about that.
Absolutely. I love my ambient poles. As a matter of fact, I have 9 of them.
Oh
And,
wow.
and and people always make fun of me because they people will tell me I buy ambient poles to keep other people from having them, and they're not exactly wrong. But ambient makes a whole bunch of products that like the QS pole I absolutely love. The QSM, which is their mini pole, I absolutely love. So those are the main ones that I usually use. The QS is an 18-footer roughly, and then the QSM or QS Mini is about a 12-foot pole. And between those, I can pretty much boom 99% of the stuff I do. But the reason I like them is they are a little bit heavier, but the wall of the carbon fiber, it's pre-preg carbon fiber. It's basically a sandwich of 3 different layers and makes it really, really stiff. It's also about 1.5 millimeters thick. So when you put the pole out there, it is very, very straight, and you can snap it exactly where you want it to go, kind of like a bow staff does in the film in martial arts. So if I snap something, I want it to go there, and some boom poles, if you put them out there, they'll kind of turn into a rainbow. They'll bow like crazy.
Hmm.
Not so much with an ambient.
Okay. So you like to have that rigid, much more straight pull. Then on top of that, what about shock mounts? What are you using on that end and why?
Well, I'm a big fan of Sinella.
Okay.
Sinella makes very specific products for very specific microphones. But then, if I'm not using an MKH50 and I can't use an OSX 3, then I'm using something like a Shep's CMC 641. In that case, then you would want to use the OSX 2. But then they also make other, for like the DPA 4017B, they make very specific, very specialized shock mounts, but they're not universal at all. You can't use them with other things. So I'm also a big fan of the Rycote Envision 6 and Envision 7 lyres. Those things are completely brilliant to me. And between those two, I'm able to do most of the stuff that I want to. But there's also I think it's the PSC McDonald M5 mount, which is a it's it kind of like we call it like the juice can because it's got two round bits. The microphone goes through it with rubber bands on there, and those are really it's a very simple design, but it's very versatile too. You can add more rubber bands to dial in on your tension. If you want to put something on there like a heavier wind protection, you can just add another rubber band or switch it out for a thicker rubber band. A lot of people that use those will use the broccoli. They'll go and buy a bunch of broccoli from the grocery store, use those big thick rubber bands that come with broccoli, and they'll put them around there. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that you can a whole bunch of products you can use, but I usually use Sonella stuff. And if not Sonella, then I'll use the Rycote Envision 6 and Envision 7. And you're not going to hear any handling noise on an ambient boom, in my hands at least, with any of those products.
Okay, cool. And so I assume then for wind protection, when you're working outdoors, then it's also the Sonella, the wind covers as well?
Well, I love those, but not all mixers have them. A lot of mixers still use the Rycote. They'll use either the modular series or they'll use something like the Super Shield. Some even use the Cyclone. But personally, I am a big fan of the Pianissimo and the Piano Sonellas.
Okay.
Also, the Sonella Cozy is a wonderful product designed for low-profile, smaller microphones. And if you have something like a mini CMIT or you have a DPA 4018C, a little bitty microphone like that big can fit inside of this Sonella Cozy with wind protection that will go up to a good 10 miles an hour. It's very effective.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about microphones a little bit. So I guess you probably do a mix of indoor and outdoor, I'm assuming. And so when you're indoors, which mic is usually at the end of your boom? And is that a decision you make, or is that a decision the mixer makes? Or do you guys make that decision together?
It depends. The mixers have certain microphones that they have in their sound package, but and that's usually because they like a certain microphone, the sound of it. A very common one is an MKH50. A lot of people that I know love that one. Some mixers are switching over to the Sanken CS M1 for an internal microphone, even though it's a short shotgun. The thing is that long and it's very lightweight. But personally, my favorite is the DPA 4017B. But not all mixers have the microphones that us boom operators prefer. So one of the things that I will do when I first join a team is I'll say, what microphones do you have? And based on the acoustics of the room that we're in, because during the rehearsal that we're first seeing with the actors, I'll listen to the room and how their voice carries throughout the room. If I hear their voice, if they get amped up and I hear their voice echoing off a wall, I'm going to want to try to, acoustically pad that. And if I can't, because it's going to be in a shot, what microphones do we have that I can play the pattern away from that and try to reduce that? I mean, there's a whole lot to it, but it also has to do with the mixer. Some mixers will say, I only want to use this one. I only want to use this outdoor. And if you say, I can't use it because it's too long of a microphone outside, okay, fine, then resort to this one instead. There's a mixer that I work with a whole lot who uses a MKH50 exclusively inside and a Neumann KMR 82i outside. And if I can't get the 82 over someone, they'll say, okay, fine, 416. And if that doesn't work, then they'll say, fine, go 50. And we'll just, I'll put the Sonella Leonard ball on there and we'll use that. But, some mixers will only use a microphone inside. I think Jeff Wexler said in an interview that he uses the CMC 641 a lot indoors and outdoors. He loves the 641 because even though you shoot outside and there's a lot of noises out there, it sounds very pure, very clean, very precise. And it looks like it sounds without hearing like weird artifacts that are, being rejected out. But it
Right.
depends on the mixer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he brought up a good point in that was an interview with Matt Price, as I recall. At least that's one place he mentioned it was he I don't think he has anything against the 416, the Sennheiser MKH 416, but what he said is that the 416 has a relatively tight polar pattern, and so the
Yeah.
effect you get is like if a car drives behind an actor while you're booming over them, that
Hmm.
it gives this sort of weird kind of swishy sound that doesn't seem it isn't like true to life. Because of that very tight polar pattern.
Right.
So
And that's exactly true. I mean, microphones are designed basically for that frontal lobe. Usually you don't hear the coloration and the specific sound of that microphone off axis. As a matter
mhm,
of fact, usually they try to reduce that as much as possible because a lot of just sound in general is more low end, is more omnidirectional. You're going to hear that more around the entire microphone on the off axis lobes. But a microphone is a sum of all the different directions coming into that microphone at any given time. So if you try to cue away from a noise, a very aggressive noise like an air conditioning unit, those lows are still going to make it into your microphone while the highs aren't. So
Mhm.
then you have to ask yourself, is it going to compete with the fundamental vocal frequencies of the actor that you're on? And if so, how do you compensate for that? Is it better for you to hear those background noises at that point in order to at least know what it is? Well, some people will argue that as long as you see it in a shot, you can hear it. And that is absolutely true. But then if they're not on camera, then baffle that air conditioning unit as much as you can so that way you're not hearing it. But even then, you still could pick up some weird sounds from it. So I mean, there's a whole lot to consider.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
that is usually a decision that you make with your sound mixer.
Right. Okay. So I'm curious. So when you do go into the room and you find that the actor is getting a little bit more excited, modulating a bit more, and you are in a position where you want to try and tame that reverberation a little bit, what kind of materials are you using to do that?
Well, it depends. There's a whole lot of depends. Sometimes I'll put up, I'll make a sandwich of a Fernie pad. Usually those are very common on set. I can just call for a couple to come in from grips with some clamps. Sometimes we'll even get a stand with a couple of gobo arms, and we'll make a stand for those. Usually I'll just tape them to a wall. And as much as it is to say that's not actually good enough for the low end, it takes a lot of the curse off of especially higher end reflections and depending like higher frequency reflections, I mean. So that will be something that we do. Sometimes we'll just sandwich it up, and believe it or not, if you could just put a sandwich of 4 or 5 layers of a Fernie pad in the corners of the room, that actually functions kind of like a bass trap, and it will completely baffle the room and take a lot of the reflections out in the same kind of way that if you're playing pool and you hit a cue ball hard enough in any random angle, it's most likely going to find a corner and
Hmm.
to go in a corner pocket. Same kind of thing there. It will most likely find the reflections of your voice or your sounds in that room, and it will take out quite a bit of it.
Interesting. And with air conditioners, do you put Fernie pads over the registers? Is that the one of the things you do? Is that how you manage that?
Well, it depends again. I hate to keep telling you depends, but there's a lot of depends. If the
Yeah.
actual air conditioning unit is something that you can't kill it from the inside, one of the questions we'll ask locations is, can we open it up and flip the breaker? We've done that a whole lot. We'll just say, this air conditioning unit, and they'll say it's behind a closed door. We can't get there, and they've left for the day. Oh, they've left? Then they won't mind us flipping this thing up, and then we pull the breaker, and we're like, done. But sometimes if you're shooting exterior and it's cycling on and off and it's on top of a building or something, you really can't do a whole lot except pick maybe a microphone with more rejection. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll make a baffle if it's outside. But I mean, it really is. There's different things that we can do regarding air conditioners, like inside. A lot of offices, for example, have the drop ceilings.
Hmm.
And if they have a vent that's sitting up there in the drop ceiling, sometimes it's as simple as getting a cube, one of or not a cube, but one of the tiles, pushing the tile up that has the vent into the room, shoving it to the side, and then replacing it with another tile, so that way it's venting into the roof. Then it baffles it quite effectively. You can also, if it's one of those smaller, vents like inside of a house, they sell magnetic what do they call vent covers, and you could stick those up there, cut it to size, and put that up there, or you could just use cardboard. And as long as you tame the airflow that's coming out, you can easily knock that down quite a bit, quite a few decibels by doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. That's really helpful practical information. I almost always will have some sound blankets, Fernie pads on hand with me, even if I just leave them in the car, because there's so
Oh
many
yeah,
different circumstances where that can be
better to
helpful.
have it
So
not need it than need it not have it.
absolutely, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about another thing that I think different boom ops and mixers feel differently about, and I'm curious what your perspective is. When you move to a wide shot, some boom ops and mixers will say, we're perfectly happy moving the boom back to keep the sound perspective the same as camera perspective. What's your
Mhm.
thought on that?
Well, first of all, I will do that anyway. I won't
Hmm.
just say, okay, well, I'm taking a breather for this take, and I'm just gonna, use it like a flagpole right next to me and just kind of pretend to be Moses holding a staff and just watch set. I don't do that. I will still throw it out and see what I can get. But a lot of times, it depends on the mixer too. Some mixers will say, I'm not going to use you at all. I'm just going to play the lavs. Some mixers will, like one mixer told me, find a neutral corner in the room that he said, listen to the room, find the corner that is quietest, and point the microphone into that corner. So that way he would actually use that as the base level of the room tone. And then as he would bring in a lav, he'd bring me down a little bit, and he balanced out the noise floor constantly against that. Some mixers will say, I'm going to throw the boom out there, get whatever you can. We'll go to a longer reach microphone if we need to, and he'll give it a little bit of fattening up with the lavs if you need to. It really depends. I mean, there's a whole lot to it, and it all depends on the mixer and their mixing style.
Yeah, yeah.
My personal preference, I just got through working with a mixer on a movie. I did the first half of a movie called The Devil All the Time, and it's and it's a movie that's going to be out in Netflix. But when I was doing that, they shot primarily with one camera, and it was also film. So, and because it was a period movie, one of the things that the mixer, talked to me about when he first hired me is he said, so the director has asked if I could get some vintage retro microphones. And I'm like, he wants you to get like an SM5 and throw it up there, or a EV6, 741 and break my arms. He wants you to do that kind of thing. Does he know what he's doing? And I just kind of laughed. We both kind of laughed about it, but we came to, he said, what would you recommend? And I said, what I would recommend is we do it more like they used to do when they were single camera films. Since this is a period piece, since it's shot on film, and because it's mostly single camera, why don't I throw the boom out there and play perspective if nothing else? And we may be tracking the lavs, but don't use them. Just rely on camera perspective, and let's do it old school. And he loved the idea. The director loved the idea. And Video Village people were like, wow, it sounds like a movie. Instead of having to resort to a wide and a tight and having to play the lavs to match the tight, we were able to play and play with the perspective like that. And that was, it turned out great. I love the sound of that movie.
Okay, cool. And when you say play the perspective, precisely what do you mean by that? Do you mean you mostly positioned yourself as the boom op and kept the boom generally in the vicinity of the camera to get the perspective from there? Is that what you mean?
Sometimes that's what it is. But if a camera is looking this direction and the actors are 10 feet away, but it's a wide shot and I can't get the boom closer than like 4 feet, what I'll try to do is, knowing how that looks, I'm going to try to make decisions to get the sound that matches that look. Now, sometimes that means putting the boom right on top of the camera and simply pointing the lenses here, and I'll just put the camera right on top, or the boom right on top of that. Sometimes I'll be 10 feet out over the actors and getting as much as I can there. It really depends on the shot, how it looks, how it sounds. If it's a reflective room, I'm going to have to do it differently. Sometimes, depending, there's a whole lot of factors, and there's a whole lot of different techniques we can do. Sometimes I'll split the difference. Sometimes cameras are really loud and they have very noisy fans on there, in which case I can't play the camera perspective. I got to go out there over the actors. Yeah. And so there's a whole lot of factors that will really help me dial in the sound the way that I think it should sound. And mixers will sometimes say, is there a way for you to play more in front of the actors? Because I want to hear the sound more of the cars moving around behind them. I'll say, absolutely. And I'll change up my tactic. Okay. But I'll usually try to make it sound like I would want it to for the way it looks.
Yeah, that's cool. And that's a nuance that I think a lot of first-time boom ops and mixers don't necessarily realize. And it's really interesting. So if you go back and watch some of those older classic movies, if you go back and watch Lawrence of Arabia, I remember some scenes in there where you have, is it Peter O'Toole in the room, and he walks kind of away from the camera a little bit, turns his back. And the first time I saw it, and I was listening to it from a soundy perspective, I was like, wow, they didn't really track him. Like, they didn't track him really aggressively and run out with the boom pole on top of him. They actually let it fall off like it would if you were actually in the room, which is very interesting.
And that very well could have been because it was just a single camera. And it also could have been because they were using a preambulator boom, which is a boom that you basically put on some sort of wheels, and it's a structure that stands up, and a boom operator sits there, and there's an arm that moves a microphone out over the actors, and you kind of move dials and knobs, I guess you could almost call them, in order to change the position of the microphone. Cable will make the microphone go out or twist or something, and they could have gone out of the reach of that. There's a whole lot of reasons why, especially in older movies, why somebody could fall off.
Yeah, for sure. So another question I forgot to ask you earlier on when we were talking about boom poles: do you wear gloves when you're booming, or do you not, and why?
I don't because I usually rely on a lot of feel of the pole. I will rock my hands certain ways. I'll twist. I'll naturally just change my grip in the middle of it. I'll slide my hand and I'll dial it in the way I want it to. Gloves usually will impede that. Usually, what I'll use gloves for is pulling cables up and routing them, especially if I'm outside or in a messy environment. But I do sometimes have to if I have to kind of go into stealth mode because we're looking into glass. If there's like glass all behind the actor, sometimes I always wear black on set, but sometimes if I'm wearing short sleeves, I'd have to put into longer sleeves and put the gloves on to boom with that. It just
Okay.
really sometimes the camera will be low looking up and they say, well, we don't see the boom because it's black, but I see your hands. And I'll say, okay, black gloves it is. And
Hmm.
then I'll boom with them. But I
Okay.
try not to as a general rule.
Gotcha. And where do you get black gloves, and what's the material on the gloves?
Oh, geez, I played around with a whole bunch of them. Uh, Believe it or not, biker gloves usually work pretty well because they're reinforced right through here. BMX gloves are very effective. The ones I just got through getting and I'm trying right now, which I actually really like, is one of the mechanics types gloves that you can buy on Amazon or buy a specialty shop. Mechanics sells a whole bunch of different kinds of gloves, but the ones that I'm currently using that I like, they have a very thin lining, so it's very much like a form-fitting skin.
Hmm.
You can't still feel the little minute details with your fingertips, but it slides very nicely and it still breathes and it has padding where you would want it to. And I
Yeah.
really like that.
Okay. Cool. Now, one of the challenges too that people realize very quickly the first time they boom is this is a very physical job, and arms get tired very quickly, and
They
sometimes there
do.
are long takes. I did once a 22-minute take, and I thought I was going to die. What are some of your thoughts and kind of advice and techniques for managing those types of to getting someone experienced and able to do those longer takes?
Well, first of all, you have to build up that endurance and that strength to it. A lot of the times people will say you got to limber up in the morning, you got to loosen yourself up. Um, Me personally, I I should, but I don't. I'm really bad about that. But usually I'm naturally energetic. As soon as I get on set, I'll get an adrenaline rush, and that will naturally just loosen me up. So, because I'm also not the kind of boom operator that will sit there and just, do this number, I'm actually actively going for that little fine tuning of where the mic position is. But there's, it's, there's really, sorry, I totally got derailed there and forgot what I was going with this. But,
It's definitely is you gotta
it's
do it often. You
It
can't
is.
just
It
walk
is.
in.
And not just that. I mean, it's one of those things also where you have to do things like muscle shifting. A lot of the times people think of a boom operator holding their arms over their head, but believe it or not, you don't want to do that.
Mm-mm.
If you can, if I'm holding a boom over my head and I'm 10 feet away from the actor, one of the things I'll often do is see if I can go back to maybe extending out the pole 15 feet, if I can lower my arms down to my chest instead. With
Mm-hmm.
my elbows down right here, I can hold it all day long.
Yep.
And so that's one of the things. And sometimes also, if I'm just holding it right here, I'll throw an arm on top and just relax if it's just a plant, someone standing there, and there's not a whole lot to the scene. If
Yeah.
someone's sitting down, and if I'm not holding it this way, one of the things I'll sometimes do is put my arm right here. I'll lay the pole in there, and I'll just put my hand up on my chest and sit with the pole that way. I mean, there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of things I do, but it all depends on the action. Because if an
Yeah.
actor goes from sitting down to standing up, I have to be able to adjust with that on the fly. And part of being a boom operator and knowing the lines is knowing the action. So I have to not only know where that line is and who's going to be delivering it in advance, so that way I know at what point to cue off of this person onto this person without missing a syllable, but I also have to know how to position the microphone in physical space, how to snap without making a whoosh noise. There's a whole lot of things like that,
Yeah.
in addition to the dancer on camera and the lighting and everything else.
Yeah. For sure. There's a lot going on. It feels like to me when I'm booming, It's like it's like a full day adrenaline rush. Like I am on 100%. My nervous system is operating at 100% all day
Very
long because
much.
you have so much going on. So it's pretty interesting. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about monitoring. You've got your head in cans or headphones for a really long days. What are you using and why?
Well, most of the time, if mixers have different systems. Some mixers have their own talkback system with uh, like a Shure microphone, a dynamic or condenser that comes around,
Hmm.
and they'll have that goes into a transmitter that will transmit back. Sometimes the mixer just expects you to bring your own headphones that you're comfortable with. And if that's the case, I usually use the Sony MDR 7506s, which are great headphones. I really love monitoring on those. Part of it's because you do have a little bit more bass that you hear, so you can hear the minute details of things like handling noise, but you can also hear through the cans themselves. They're not completely closed ear like some like this right here, the ATH M50X headphones. I can't really hear a whole lot through these, but with the MDR 7506s, I can. So if I'm wearing those and I suddenly hear a noise coming from this direction, I will be able to identify that wearing the 7506s. And usually the first thing I'll do is do this number and I'll start listening and say, is that where that comes from? Cool. And then I'll usually keep an ear out during the rest of the take and then do this afterwards. But sometimes mixers will build the comm system into the headphones themselves, in which case you will have to use theirs. And in that case, usually you will switch out and use something like headphone softies, so that way you're not using the same headphones with the same ears that someone else is sweating and is, throughout the years. You're at least having a little sense of cleanliness to it.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing that's interesting too is I generally will use this 7506s as well. And I think you touched on some interesting things. To me, I think a big part of it is comfort. They
Yeah,
are extraordinarily comfortable microphones on my head. Everybody's head is different, and so it's going to depend on from person to person. But I like that
yeah.
they're little. You can buy replacement parts. You can fold them down, so they're pretty to transport there. But comfort is probably the biggest thing, and your ears get used to that kind of
And they don't
overemphasized
sandwich you
bass.
too hard over a long day.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you do need a high noise version, Remote Audio even sells the 7506 drivers inside of what looks like a helicopter pilot type headphones, and they call it the HN 7506 high noise. And you can
Hmm.
get that where it really isolates out the outside sounds. The bass does come up just a little bit because it's not venting out the side anymore, and you have that same fidelity, and it kind of it's not noise canceling. It just kind of blocks it,
Yeah,
and they're very common.
yeah, yeah. Cool. What other things do you find? So when you talk to other people and they're asking you about boom operating, what are some things you find that they're curious about, or that they don't know like a beginning boom operator? What are the things that you generally will have to teach them, or kind of point out to them to help them along?
It's a lot about relationships. One of the big things that you have to establish on set is that you deserve to be there. A lot of the times someone will say, hey, I need the boom operator to get off set because we're lighting here. If you do that, you're potentially going to be lit out of the scene. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll tell people, okay, give them that, but at the same time, don't go far. Watch on a monitor. Step in periodically in order to check the frame and see what's going on. Because a
Hmm.
lot of the times, if they're lighting and they're starting to do something that's not going to be good for you, you can address it with the DP, and they'll sometimes change strategy or cut a light while it's going on. But as soon as they say, okay, we're done lighting, that's it. If you come in there then and throw the boom around and you're shadowing all over the back wall, and then you suddenly say, well, wait a second, I need to get someone in here to assist with this, then they're going to say, why didn't you say anything when we were actually lighting?
Yeah.
Or they'll say, no, I'm sorry, picture's up right now. We've been lighting now for 45 minutes. We have to go. So, you know, but you have to have these relationships with people on set, because there are, in my opinion, four people that are always on set that you have to be tight with: the camera operator, the dolly grip, and the first AC, and in additional to the boom operator. Us four people are always on set. If they have a very sensitive scene and they clear off everyone else, there's not going to be a props person or an AD. It's just going to be us four. And if the camera operator thinks that I'm just going to be in their way and constantly just trying to get my sound, then they're probably not going to be as likely to help me as if it is if they know that I'm on their side too. Because one of the big things that I am is because part of my camera background is because I understand light, I understand shadows. I also understand that reflections are going to be present. So I will ask an operator, can you do me a favor and check this and tell me if you see me in reflecting in this picture frame? And if so, they'll adjust. And I basically established very early on that not only am I here for sound, I'm also here as a team player and I have your back too. As soon
Yeah.
as you have a camera operator's back, the DP will appreciate it, and as will, and that will radiate through. The dolly group will suddenly say you need a little bit of extra room, and they'll say, okay, well, I'll operate from this side instead. And the first AC may say, you know what, I'll pull focus from back here. I don't need to do it right on the camera.
Yeah.
And I mean, usually they'll remote focus now anyway through a Preston or something, but still there's a lot of times that first ACs will still be right on set and they'll be glad to give you an extra inch as long as you've established that good rapport. Because here's the thing, they don't need you to do their job. We need them to do ours. Let me explain. If I am on set and I need someone to check me, or I need to explain, say, what is your shot? When you're looking at this person, when they stand up, are you letting them leave your shot or are you going up with them? That's information I need to know. When someone comes through here and they sit down, same exact thing. Sometimes they'll say, oh, no, they'll leave my shot, or we're not going to go that far. A lot of people will look at the monitor and they'll just look at that and say, oh, that's what the shot is. Well, monitors lie. I mean, if you rely on what's on the monitor, it could be there for lighting. And the operator is going to do something totally different. So one of the things I'll do is I'll ask the operator, what are you going to be pointing the camera at? Because they're going to know. And then if there's anything in that move that I need to work through or something like that, they understand that I'm doing it for them and doing it for me, and we'll have each other's back. So it's a mutual relationship and something that I usually try to establish real quickly as someone that cares about picture and sound.
Yeah. For sure. I had an interesting experience along those lines where I kind of, as a newer mixer, and I was doing both. I was mixing from a bag and booming at the same time. And it was my first 2-camera shoot, and I didn't talk to the second camera op. And, I realized halfway through the shoot, he was glaring at me like, what are you doing? You're directly in my shot, dude, because he was shooting wider. And definitely a lesson learned the hard way in terms of understanding ahead of time before you start rolling what's
Oh,
happening out
absolutely.
there. Yeah. So good deal. Okay. Anything else you want to tell the audience? Obviously, first of all, we need to take a pause here. Alan Williams, thank you. Obviously, he's just done it. I've learned a ton. I hope everyone else has as well. You can find him on YouTube if you just do a search for Sound Speeds. So youtube.com/Sound Speeds, and you'll find him there. He's got a great channel. Learned lots of things about sound for video and film. Anything else, Alan, that you feel like it would be beneficial for the audience that's interested in boom opping and sound in general?
Well, if you're interested in actually being a boom operator, I do have a series on my channel called 3BO, which stands for Building Better Boom Ops. And in that, I actually talk about what it is to be a boom operator, and I go into different topics, and there's hours of content there. So if you're interested in being a boom operator, that's one thing that you can do. Another thing is, start with indies. Don't try to instantly join the union and work on the bigger shows. Work your way up, because a lot of the times it's you'll come straight out of a film school and you think you could conquer the world because that's the kind of mindset they put you on there. They put you in there, but as soon as you get on set, you're going to be annoying everyone around you. Not for any of your any faults on your own. It's just because that's what you were trained to do, and it's different on set. Set etiquette is huge, and you got to understand that. And it's better to get that on the smaller sets before you step on a bigger set and make a fool of yourself and have a mixer say, I'm not going to use this person again. And they'll tell everyone not to hire you. So start on the little shows, doing little indies, even volunteering yourself for a while on those in order to build up some experience. And then maybe start to accept small, low paying jobs that you find on Craigslist or something. And if you can volunteer for mixers and become their right-hand person, their boom operator that they actually care for and they enjoy working with, they'll carry you to other shows and you can start to slowly make money on it. And then at some point, the people around you you're going to find are going to be going with you and they're all learning together and you're all going to start progressing and moving up together into bigger and better shows. And at some point, you're going to get the opportunity to maybe interact with some of the bigger shows and bigger mixers and bigger guys in town. And at that point, you'll be ready for it. It's a lot better to do that than it is to come straight out of film school, join the union, and say, "Hey guys, I'm ready." Step on set and say, "So, what do you want me to do first?" And they'll be like, "Your job," So
Yeah. I,
that's the big thing right there.
I absolutely agree. And I think that there are a lot of lessons learned. Just you have to get out there and you have to do it. And it's better to do it on passion projects with your friends where, you have a friend that's a DP or whatever. That's a perfect opportunity because you guys can learn together. You guys will make mistakes. And I have my core set of friends here in the Park City, Salt Lake, Utah area where,
Mhm.
we're tied in. Levi Whitney is a DP that I work with a lot, and it's been a really good experience because we've grown together. And the interesting thing is I've been able to teach him a lot of things about sound that make especially if he's going to be doing some of the directing and the post work as well, the editing,
Yeah.
or he's going to editorial. Um,
Oh, he'll
he didn't.
appreciate it.
Oh yeah. I mean, he didn't know how to use time code. Like time code was a foreign concept to him. He was scared to do it, and job after job, he's like, no, 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 we're not going to do time code. I'll just sync.
Yeah.
I'll just manually sync. Once I showed him how to do it on a recent shoot, he's like,
Oh, never
oh
going
my,
back.
I'm never going back.
Yep.
So, it's interesting because you get that opportunity to kind of grow together and you become this really solid team. And when you guys can work together and again, like you say, start working on larger and larger budget projects, um, it becomes so much fun because you have the experience, you know how to solve certain problems together. You guys understand each other, like you say, someone
A
brings a
working
joker.
relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a working relationship, and it's also that kind of shared experience where someone brings a certain kind of light on set, and you're like, okay, here are our options. I'm just letting you know up front. These are the challenges we could face if we don't move that ballast, or so on and so forth. So good
Yeah.
stuff there. Yeah, Alan, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a really
Thank you
great
for having me,
conversation,
Curtis.
and let us know if you ever need anything, and keep doing the great work over there on Sound Speeds. Really
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much.
All right, talk to you again soon.
Thanks.